Hi, I'm Femi. Welcome to the stream. On today's episode, a new proposed law in France and the controversy surrounding it. The anti-separatist bill is aimed, its purpose is to stop radicalisation. But there are many Muslims in France who feel that it targets them and the way they wish to practice their faith. So online, there are rallies, there are campaigns around a couple of different hashtags. For instance, pour touche mon hijab or hands off my hijab. Hashtag France hijab ban. You can join that discussion with us right now on YouTube. Jump into the comment section and be part of today's show.
As a French Muslim woman, I am exhausted and angry to see once again the policing of my beliefs, my choices, and my body. My country has made me choose between my hijab and my education, my career, my engagement with sports, and my duty as an aunt wanting to chaperone my nieces in schools. As a French citizen, I am stripped of my most basic human rights. So we act together with other French women. We're raising awareness, calling for solidarity with the hashtag pas touche à mon hijab to put an end to this implicit sexism and anti-Muslim hatred before it's too late.
There is a lot to talk about. We will be doing that with Marco, Yasser, Miriam. Welcome to the stream. Marco, introduce yourself to our international audience.
Hello to everyone. My name is Marco PEROLINI, as I work as a researcher with Amnesty International in London.
Good to have you. Yasser, welcome back to the stream. Remind our audience who you are, what you do.
My name is YASSER LOUATI. I'm a human rights and civil liberties activist. I head the Committee for Justice and Liberties for All and also host of the podcast Le Breakdown.
Nice to have you back. And Miriam, welcome to the stream. Introduce yourself to our international audience.
I'm Dr. Miriam Francois. I'm a Franco-Irish journalist and a research associate at the SOAS Centre for Islamic Studies.
So I guess I have to tell you, and audience as well, we invited the Minister of Gender Equality for France to our conversation. We also asked a number of members of the National Assembly to join us, and everybody that we talked to said they were unavailable. But I want to take you back to last October when President Macron gave us at Al Jazeera an exclusive interview, and he specifically talked about the anti-separatist bill. Here he is.
It is a bill of law to combat the violent extremist groups and individuals who are active in France in the name of Islam. It is designed to protect all French people and more broadly and indeed specifically those of the Muslim faith. So what do we intend to do? Prevent them from taking children out of school, the children of the Republic. We also intend to put a stop to the financing linked to terrorists which enables them to pursue their activities. So financial transparency and above all, something which for me is essential in France, ensuring that everyone, irrespective of their faith or religion, fully observes the legislation of the French Republic. That is essential.
When you heard about the bill, guys, I'm just going to get an instant reaction because I want to see where your minds are right now. Your reaction. Miriam, go ahead.
I mean, I think President Macron has worked really hard to present a very different face to the international media than what he has domestically in France. And hearing their, talk of protecting children, somehow, stopping the funding of terrorism, what that has actually manifested at in the bill has been, prohibiting essentially Islamic schooling, children being trained, schooled at home, which is a fundamental right, but also this idea of funding terrorism. What we're actually seeing in the bill is the stopping of funding of mosques. What we're talking about is international funding, which has historically been one of the only means for mosques to get built in France being stopped. So, this is a major issue. We're talking about a country in which there's already a major inequality in the levels of provisions when it comes to places of worship. There are around 4,500 mosques in France to cater to around 6 million people. Comparatively speaking, there are 45,000 churches, 40,000 of those actually funded by the state to cater for about 3.2 million Catholics, just to give you a comparative.
Yeah, so go ahead.
Well, I mean, it becomes unbearable to see the president lie in such a comfortable manner. He spoke of children being taken out of school. So they passed laws to exclude girls who wear a scarf since 2004. When they are excluded, their communities set up schools. Now the government cracks down on those schools and wants to shut them down. When families can't afford private schools and have homeschooling, they want to keep those kids from receiving homeschooling. Now, the problem is Emmanuel Macron could not name one single Muslim organization calling for separatism. But I can tell you, the Republic is the one excluding, then calls those ones excluded the separatists. And the last point, how can we fight separatism when the government does not fight the systemic discrimination Muslims go through at work, house, even to access to healthcare? Honestly, it has really become unbearable for us.
I am just looking, Marco, at how Amnesty International are viewing this anti-separatist bill on my laptop. France, Republican values, law risks discrimination. Would you be very brief, but pick out some of the points of this bill that are giving you, as Amnesty International, a human rights organisation, concern? What are the problem areas?
Yes, the bill actually raises many concerns in terms of human rights. So the first one is clearly the right to association. So the bill actually includes very problematic provisions, including the fact that, for example, funding of associations, any organizations will have to subscribe to a so-called Republican contract, which obviously the content of which is very, very vague, and could actually lead to restricting funding to associations in a way that restricts actually their right to association. The second problematic area is clearly freedom of expression and freedom of religion. It's really important that organizations in France and everywhere else can actually, express their dissent in a way that is not compliant with governmental policies. And this bill really presents a risk in that respect, and could actually result in silencing organizations that do not agree with governmental policies. The third area, which is really problematic, is discrimination. Discrimination against specific communities, particularly Muslims. When we look at the context in which this bill has been proposed, the debate in Parliament that have contextualized this bill, we see that there has been a lot of stigmatization of Muslims. It's not the first time, but this actually raises really concerns regarding the discriminatory implementation of the bill when it's going to be adopted.
One of the things that I wanted to do is just to give you a sense of the atmosphere in France. I told you about these viral campaigns where people are incensed with some of these provisions of this anti-separatist bill, still a bill right now, but there also is support. I've seen on YouTube some support where somebody on YouTube is saying right now, France is doing a good thing, good idea, good plan, France. This is SEBASTIEN CHENU, who I'm going to say is a right-wing National Assembly representative. I think that's a fair description of him. This is what he said about this proposed law.
It is rather a bunch of measures that seem to us to be going in the right direction. When they seem to be going in the right direction, we voted for these amendments. Overall, the text is not up to the challenge. We don't want to vote against it so as not to oppose it. Everything that can help to fight against radical Islam in our country must be implemented, however small it may be. And here, in this case, it is tiny. The advances are tiny, not to say ridiculous.
Yeah, so there's been such a division of reaction regarding this anti-separatist bill. And I'm just wondering, does the government have advisors who are actually practicing Muslims? Because some of these provisions feel very extreme. Yasser.
Well, you would be shocked. The most radical version of the so-called Charter of Imams was actually written by the Grand Mosque of Paris. So that shows that even some Muslim organizations are in cahoots with the government, and that's why it is upon the shoulders of Muslims to stand and take back control of their own organizations. Now, listening to this person called Sébastien CHENU, a far-right activist and politician, he says that this goes against radical Islam. When are these people going to define what radical Islam is? Because right now we have, amendments against hijab for minors, Muslim mothers, Muslim schools, Muslim places of worship, Muslim charities, and even prohibiting foreign flags in weddings. If that's not a political and administrative war being waged against Muslims specifically, but later on that could be extended to the wider French society, because these measures today, yes, they're easy to implement because you can shut down Muslim organizations, but tomorrow amnesty can be shut down if the government decides to, because they are too subversive and too critical of the republic. We are witnessing the downward spiral of France towards a return to what we used to call fascism. The last point, if I may, is that Emmanuel Macron and his Minister of Education and the Minister of Interior have all ganged up in order to have Macron re-elected for the next elections. The problem is they claim to unite France against an enemy within, but they are actually targeting the very foundations of France. One sentence. Article 1 of the French Constitution, the Republic respects all religions. Where is that constitution today, and where is its application under Emmanuel Macron?
Miriam, I'd love you to listen to some of the French women that we spoke to a little bit earlier and their reaction to this anti-separatist bill. Have a listen, have a look.
The anti-separatism bill is threatening Muslim people's rights, makes them feel more and more excluded and marginalized. They no longer feel they belong to French society.
I am speaking out as a hijabi fashion model who often works in France. The only thing this bill will separate is the Muslim women from the public space. They claim freedom and liberation for all, but it is clear that some are more free than others.
It is a totally draconian, shameful and Islamophobic amendment. Prohibiting women from wanting to dress how they wish, it is no way a defense of women's rights, because the hijab is part of our identity.
Miriam, what reaction have you been seeing?
Well, look, I think you raise this question of religious literacy, and I think that it's come up consistently when we've seen proposals from the government that there is clearly the kindest interpretation is a lack of religious literacy in the highest levels of the French government. But you could also argue that actually, historically, the French government has consistently avoided listening to and responding to the French Muslim community, and instead has always chosen to define an interlocutor that it could control and provide limits to what that particular association should do. So, for example, the CFCM, which is a government-created body, Muslim body, I should put, which is essentially held up as somehow being representative of the wider Muslim community, but has very little actual support from the wider community, is just one indication of the sense that the government doesn't actually want to hear what French Muslims have to say, and doesn't actually, in that sense, have the, from my perspective, there's a dereliction of duty from the government here. These are French citizens, and it is their right to practice their religion, just like it is the right of every citizen within that country. And from the minute the government ignores that portion of the citizenry and actually creates laws that specifically target them, whatever it says publicly, I think that's very clear to most people. In fact, it's probably quite clear to those who support it. It's actually going against the very principles on which the Republic is built. And I think that's the saddest and most worrying part of this whole debacle, is that Muslims are on the front line when it comes to this particular bill, but what we're talking about is the disintegration of the very principles on which the Republic has been built, and which historically and presently French Muslims have always supported. The Republic, laïcité, they don't have a problem with that. It's just the government's instrumentalization of these concepts, essentially to gain more votes away from the far right and regain that terrain. Emmanuel Macron came to power as a centre candidate. He's now very much flirting with the right.
All right, so Miriam, I want to put some of these questions to you that are coming from our YouTube audience, because they want to react and interact with you. So I'm going to put this one to you, Marco, a brief response if I can get one from you. Emmanuel says, the government has no religion, but it must control religions for the benefit of all citizens. All religions must respect the laws and also respect other religions. Marco, react.
Yes, first, it's not up to the state, not in France, not in Iran, not in Saudi Arabia, to tell actually women, Muslim women, what to dress, how to dress, what to wear or what not to wear. So that's actually first a very important principle. The second one is that we need to remember what actually meant laïcité in 1905 when actually the law on laïcité was introduced. It meant that the state actually should stay away from religious matters and should enable everyone to practice religions freely. So that's actually what neutrality, that's what actually laïcité means, which means that we see, and at the moment actually we see exactly the contrary. We have seen exactly the contrary in the last 20 years. The French government, the French authorities have in fact actually progressively restricted religious practice with obviously a discriminatory impact, particularly on Muslim communities.
Yes, I see you nodding your head. I want to take on this comment here from Storyboard Writing. Thank you for being part of the show today. Isn't most of the legislation presented in this bill more of a response to French nationalism than actual terrorism, Yasser?
Well, first, of course, it's not an answer to terrorism. Otherwise, they would have asked the questions why these attacks are happening and why do they keep happening. The second question, yes, there is a return to the old school ethno-nationalism in France. Now, of course, others before Muslims paid the full price, and we know what happened in the 1930s and 40s. But what we see today is we also see the crumbling regime that we call the Fifth Republic, born in 1958. People think France is a republic. It is not. It is only a compromise between a monarchy and a republic. The 1958 constitution was born out of a coup d'etat in order to have a president called Charles de Gaulle. And because that regime is highly authoritarian, with very few checks and balances, a weak parliament, the judiciary is not really independent because the prosecutor is nominated by the executive branch of power. On top of it, we have skyrocketing inequalities. 100,000 people have died in France under COVID-19. 1 million people have fallen below the poverty line. 300,000 students are now queuing up at food banks because they are starving in the midst of the pandemic. The only answer the government has, like its predecessors, toward the wider French population is, we cannot grant you a bright future, but we can grant you a battle against your Muslim neighbors, i.e. the enemy within. So right now, the only thing governments have is identity politics. If I may add one thing, Marco spoke about the 1905 law, we have to keep in mind that it is again sending us back to the colonies. Why? In 1905, the law that separated church and state was never applied in the colonies in order to keep Islam under control. This is exactly what's happening today in France. The law exists. It is applied when it comes to Catholics and others, but when it comes to Muslims, they cannot benefit from it. It's like you are in a rigged game, and anytime freedom and liberties are to your advantage, we rig the game, change the rules of the games, and have you not be able to organize as such. The 1905 law is not upheld when it comes to Muslims, and that's exactly what this government is doing.
Let me just bring everyone up to date with what is beginning to happen in France. And I'm going to share this tweet with you here. 2 mosques have been firebombed and vandalized in France during the past 24 hours. I'm just going to scoot up here. This is just from the past few days, which will give you an idea of why we were asking this seemingly provocative question. Is France legalising Islamophobia? Marco, what kind of impact have you seen in terms of the way the government is dealing and talking to Muslim communities, and then what is happening down on the ground in terms of their safety and in terms of their security?
We have often seen hate crimes perpetrated against Muslims actually as in the context of, for example, after violent attacks, after terrorist attacks, we witnessed a response from the French authorities that is often disproportionate. A response that often embeds actually stereotypes against Muslims. And this actually is usually associated with hate crimes, with attacks actually against mosques, but also against Muslims on the street, including Muslim women. We've seen that repeatedly in the context of, in the last 5 years. or 6 years. Unfortunately, what's happening is not new. We've seen that in the context of the state of emergency after the Paris attacks of 2015. The government actually replying with emergency measures, with disproportionate measures, and these actually create really a climate that is threatening for Muslim communities in France.
I want to talk about what will happen next, because this is a bill, it's not a law. And even in France, there are discussions about fine-tuning this bill, and not everybody can agree on it. Miriam, what's your take?
Thankfully, not everybody can agree with it, absolutely. And I think, you know, there's a battle, in my view, for the very soul of France happening right now. And this bill is just one example of that. You know, the bill has since gone through the Senate. In the Senate, it actually was hardened. In other words, there were additional provisions added to it, which were even more worrying. Suggestions now that you would remove welfare for students who were absent from school. And this is clearly aimed at the fact that, you know, there are no provisions for children, for example, to take a day off school for Eid, which is a big celebration. We're talking about 10 million people in France for whom Eid is just as important as Christmas is for Christians or secular people. And so we could now imagine that French Muslims, many of whom are from more impoverished communities and may be dependent on welfare, could have those welfare payments removed. These are punitive measures. We're seeing mothers who would be wanting to accompany their children in an act of civic duty on, say, a school outing now being banned. We're seeing Muslim women who would like to go, you know, and stay healthy. We're in the middle of a massive health pandemic. They want to go swimming. No, they can't. Now there are provisions suggesting that you wouldn't be able to wear a full-length swimming suit to a swimming pool. All of this very much creates a climate which I think is increasingly clear and dividing France into two parts. And I think it's important to remember that.
Right.
Just as
Miriam,
there is a hard...
Can I ask you this very quickly? Let me ask this very quickly, because Anwar is really curious, and we've got you here right now. Anwar says, is Macron only doing this to get more far-right followers? Is he afraid to lose to Le Pen in the next elections? That's a very swift answer, Miriam. Go ahead.
I don't think he's afraid of losing to Le Pen. I think he's keen to take Le Pen's, some of Le Pen's electorate. And in fact, he doesn't, the far right has been used as a sort of scarecrow in French politics to say, oh no, you know, the far right might win, quick, vote for us. But actually what we've seen is on the left and the right, there are policies that are very much in line with what the far right has been pushing for decades now. They have set the agenda when it comes to the civic cohesion, social cohesion, and particularly when it comes to Muslims. And now they essentially have set the tone.
Thank you, Miriam. I want to leave this conversation with the World Hijab Day ambassador, because this conversation is about France, but it goes much further than France. Ashley explains why.
With this potential hijab ban, people all over the world are feeling it. We even have special initiatives this year through World Hijab Day, Fast for Unity, and Hijab 30, where there are a lot of non-Muslims participating in fasting and wearing hijab to stand in solidarity. And some of them have even chosen to do this because of France. And I think that people just hope that France will understand and learn what it is they're banning, why the hijab is so important. Hijab is part of our identity. It's our faith. It's an act of worship to God. Hijab is modesty. Hijab is our choice, and France's choice is oppression. They think that they're saving us from oppression, but they're not. They're doing the oppressing.
Conversation about a bill in France that has gone global. Thank you so much, Marco, Yasser, and Miriam, for helping us understand it in a much deeper way. Much appreciate you. Now, let me move on to what we will be doing next week on the stream. Next week, we are dedicating all of our shows to climate action and climate crisis. So if you would like to be part of those shows, you know what to do. You can be following on YouTube, jump into the comment section, as many of our YouTubers did today, and also follow us at AJStream, so you're on top of the topics, so you're ready to follow us on our shows. Monday through Thursday, Climate Week on AJStream. See you then. Take care, everybody.